Okay, and this week this is the closing parsha portion of the Torah. It's Osa Barocha. This is the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, which he's blessing the Jewish people. And the Torah says, Zosa Barocha Sheberach Moshe Ish Elokim Es Bnei Yisrael Lefnei Moshe. This is the blessing that Hashem is blessing the Jewish people before he passes away. So it's obvious the question. Firstly, what does it have to tell us before he passes away? It's obvious if you read the narrative. He ascended the mountain to pass away on this day. This is the last day of his life. What does Torah make it a point? It was before he passed away. We read that in the Torah that Sarah passed away at the age of 127. Avram passed away at the age of 175. Yitzchak, he summons his firstborn Esav and says to him, I want to bless you. Go bring back some trappings and make for me delicacies because I want to bless you before I die. Why do you think he would die? So the Midrash tells us that a person, if he's within 5 years of his mother's life or his father's life, it's possible the length of his life is the same length as his mother or his father. He's not sure. So since Yitzchak wasn't sure how long he would live, that he was within 5 years of 127 years, he wanted to make sure that he gives the blessing to Esav, his firstborn, before he passes away. That's the reason why it says, before I die, I want to give you the blessing. So over there, the Sefarno in his commentary explains that the whole concept of blessing is a spiritual concept. And the greater the dimension of the spiritual standing of that person is, the more impactful and the more effective is that bracha, is that blessing. As holy and as special as a person may be, being a composite of physical and spiritual, the blessing itself has great value, but doesn't have the ultimate value. Because since the soul is embedded in the physicality, it doesn't let it to have its full effect because the person is not fully spiritual. 30 days before a person dies, the soul already dislodges from the body. And as a result of that, right before a person dies, although he's still alive and he's still connected to his physicality, but basically the soul has already made the shift. As a result of that, the effectiveness and the impact of that blessing is a greater impact. Therefore, Yitzchak, since there was a chance he may pass away, he wants to bless him now before he dies, because now since it's made that shift, the blessing I will give you will be that greater blessing. That's how the Sefarno explains why Yitzchak said to Esau, before I die, because I want it to be the most effective blessing. Over here, it's the last day of Moshe's life. As great as Moshe was, although he was totally negated to God, and therefore he was able to prophesy in the wake state, but nevertheless, after his soul departed from him, he was a different dimension of reality, of that being truly a total spiritual being, not connected to his physicality. So therefore, the Torah tells us, Zos HaBrocha, this is the blessing of all blessings, which Moshe Ish Elokim, he's the man of God. He blessed Bnei Yisrael Lefnei Moshe before he died. What's the point? Before he dies. In his life, we could imagine what the value of his blessing was, but especially right before his neshama departs from his body, where the soul is basically disconnected, being the total spiritual being that he is, the blessing will be the ultimate, and there's no blessing compared to this blessing which he blessed the Bnei Yisrael on this day, the last day of his life. We read at the end of the portion of Vayikra, the third Chumash, we read about the blessings and the curses. If you go in my ways, follow my statutes, the bounty will be unlimited. And you read over there, the rains will come in at times, the fields will give their bounty, the trees will give their bounty, and it'll be something which you can't even fathom the level of bounty there will be. But what is it? If you're committed and you toil in my Torah to understand its value and its understanding, bounty will be unlimited. Why? God created a world and we're physical beings. And the reason why we're physical beings is because if we wouldn't have our physical component, there wouldn't be choice. And each person chooses as he wants to invest his life. The Gemara tells us at the end of Sanhedrin, Gedolim tzadikim malchei ashoris, that tzadikim, the devoutly righteous people, are greater than ministering angels. Does that mean to say a tzaddik has a greater understanding of God than an angel? The answer is definitely not. There are angels, we speak about the Seraphites and the various echelons of angels. It's something beyond anybody's understanding of what they are. It doesn't mean to say we understand better, the tzaddik understands more than they understand. Or the tzaddik is holier than they are in the physical life. An angel is an angel, whatever dimension the angel is. The Srofim, the Ofanim, the Chayes HaKodesh, whatever these angels are, they are what they are because God created them to be what they are. A tzaddik, no one's born a tzaddik. Everybody's born, you're in a crossroads. It's how you invest your life, that's ultimately what you become. You invest your life and you make enough right decisions. And you go live a life which is in conformity with the Torah, that's called tzaddik. If you live a life which is not in conformity with the Torah, it's antithetical to the Torah, that person has no relevance to spirituality. So therefore, the tzaddik is only a tzaddik because he chose to be. He invested his life, he took initiative to be the tzaddik. The angel has nothing to do with initiative. Therefore, the tzaddik is greater than the angel for that reason. So now, because we are people of free choice, we have endless temptations in our lives. The Gemara tells us that the greater you are spiritually, the greater is your challenge with the evil inclination. Why? What's the reason? That whoever is greater than his fellow, his inclination is more intense. Why? Let's say a person starts at one level, and you have challenges at a very elementary level. But as you advance, your original challenges are not challenges. It's not even a skirmish. It's nothing. Once you're secure at a certain level, you advance to the next. So if a person his challenge wouldn't increase, he has no choice any longer. So as you grow spiritually, God intensifies your challenge. So your evil inclination grows with you as you grow spiritually. Because you always have to be in a context of making a choice. Because otherwise you outgrow your evil inclination. So therefore, gradually, as you advance, the inclination advances with you to always put you in a position that you're always challenged and you have to make choices. It's known, if you read about the Vilna Gaon firstly was born with unusual physical strength. He would only sleep 2 hours in a 24-hour period and never slept more than half an hour segments. He ate very, very little. And he showed his wife exactly how to prepare the food for him. He would eat literally a morsel, and that morsel was sufficient to sustain him. And the pictures of Vilna Gaon were paintings where the Vilna Gaon had a robust appearance. So, and his wife was dedicated to be there to assist him whatever he needed. So one of the neighbors was once complaining, says, you're a fool. Your whole life is dedicated to your husband. He sits and studies, he detached from the world, what kind of life do you have? He prepares food. It takes you 8 hours a day to prepare this little morsel of food for him. What's the point? She says, you don't understand. My husband, he's beyond a human being. He's a living angel. She says, what are you talking about? He says, I'm going to show you. She takes a freshly laundered shirt, and she takes a shirt that the Vilna Gaon had worn for a day. And says, you tell me the difference between the laundered and the shirt that my husband wore. She couldn't tell the difference. Meaning, even his physicality, his level, I'm not talking about his genius. He surpassed generations which preceded him, which is something which is not found at all. We say as generations further themselves from Sinai, we actually become less and less. He actually superseded generations that preceded him. He was on the level of the earlier commentators. That was the Vilna Gaon. So his students, he had an inner circle of students who he studied with. Rav Chaim of Volozhin was one of his closest students. So the students once said to him, Rabbi, we wish we had your evil inclination because you're a malach. We have challenges. We had your evil inclination, we'd be in a better place. He says, you people don't understand. If you had my evil inclination, you people can survive. Because if I wouldn't have that level of inclination, I'd have no choice. So as I grow and as I am who I am, you can't even relate to what level of inclination I have, what I have to contend with. If you'd have to contend with it, you don't have the wherewithal, spiritually speaking, to be in a position to be able to take charge of your life. Therefore, you should be satisfied at the point you are, and each person has his evil inclination tailor-made based on his own personal situation. That's what the Vilna Gaon answered his students. We read in Pirkei Avos, "Emen kemach ein Torah." If there's no bread, there's no Torah. We have certain basic physical amenities. We have to sleep, we have to eat, we have to clothe ourselves, we have to have a roof over our heads. This is all distractions. There are many distractions in life. Despite those distractions, you have to be focused to your best ability. These are challenges. So the physicality of the person is the challenge. Everything emanates from the physical aspects of the person. You know, in the desert, there were no physical challenges. God provided everything for the Jews. The manna sustained them. They didn't have to do their bodily functions. As much as you gathered, as little as you gathered, there's always sufficient. And there was a daily stipend given every day. You'd go out, collect it, and it was enough for everything. The wellspring flowed. The clothing never had to be laundered. The clothing never wore out. And as the children grew and the clothing, as it says in the Medrash, as an animal, its hide grows with it. The clothing, miraculously, they grew with the children into adulthood. No illness, no disease, no distraction. And you're in this spiritual cocoon, which is known as the clouds of glory. This is what it was. So what were choices? Choices were not, do I interrupt my Torah study to go earn a living? There was not even a basis for envy in terms of material. Everybody had basically the same thing. So what was the whole issue? If you read what went on in the desert, the challenges were, is Moshe the true leader? Do you speak about Moshe? Are you envious of Moshe, of his spirituality? The firstborn were disenfranchised. Were they upset that the Kohanim had taken their position? Moshe chose his nephew to oversee the building of the Mishkan. Another cousin was appointed to head the family of the Levium. These were all issues. There was no water. This water ceased. They came and they complained. Why did God take us out of Egypt? All these issues, but these challenges were not challenges because they were distracted with the physicality. Do we work more? Do we work less? That all those challenges were challenges in faith and belief. Do you have sufficient faith, or do you question God? And that's what God says. They tested me 10 times in the desert. They failed 10 times. That's what God says to Moshe. Now, so over here, the Baal HaTurim writes, the numerical value of V'zos HaBrocha is Zu hi Torah. So this is the blessing. He blessed us. The numerical value, that is the Torah itself. Meaning, without blessing, you can't live as a Torah Jew. You can't survive it. You need blessing. Zu hi Torah. It goes hand in hand. It's synonymous with the other. But what about a person chooses not to follow the Torah? Then blessing has no relevance to you. Blessing exists because that is the Torah. But if you're not worthy of blessing, or you abuse the blessing, like it says in Pirkei Avos, a person who studies Torah in a difficult situation, despite he's impoverished, he studies Torah mitocha only, in a state of impoverishment, ultimately he's going to study it in a state of wealth. And the person who wastes his time when he has the means to study and he chooses not to study, ultimately God says, you're going to waste your own time without me providing. Because the bracha which exists is only to facilitate the study of Torah itself, or the observance of the mitzvos. That you shouldn't be distracted and be preoccupied with other things than the Torah itself. So Zos HaBrocha, numerically, is this is the blessing. That is the blessing. You're only worthy for the blessing because you have the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu over here is referred to as Ish Elokim, the man of Elokim. Elokim always is the attribute of justice. Why is he called Ish Elokim? So we'll discuss others, explain it differently. So I was thinking, the Talmud tells us that a person who sits on a court, if he could mediate between the two defendants, mediation is encouraged. Why? Because if one is found guilty, one's found innocent, the one who's found guilty walks away upset. And it doesn't really engender brotherhood. But if a judge mediates between the two defendants, although one doesn't get everything he wants, but he gets enough to be satisfied, and the guilty party, so-called, doesn't have to pay the full amount, which initially was put forth, he walks away, he's also happy. So when you mediate, both people walk away relatively happy. But if you find one person guilty and the other one innocent, and he has to pay the full amount, the guilty party who believed that he's innocent is not so happy about it. So, mitzvah lasus pshara. So therefore, the Gemara says there's a mitzvah to mediate and come to a compromise that both parties are happy. And that was Aaron. Aaron, whenever he would adjudicate between two parties, he would always come to a happy medium that both people were satisfied. Moshe Rabbeinu is Yaakov Hadin Sahar. Yaakov Hadin Sahar. If the law says one thing, and there's a mountain in its way, you know what you do? You pierce the mountain. Moshe Rabbeinu, there's no intolerance of anything unless it's precise and precision. Everything has to be exact. Moshe Rabbeinu never mediated, would never bring about a mediation. Everything was black and white. It's the attribute of justice. That was Moshe. So the question is, but if there's a mitzvah lasus pshara, but if there's a mitzvah to mediate, to come to a happy medium that both parties, defendants, should be satisfied, what did Moshe not accept this other formula? How to deal with two plaintiffs? Why did he say, Yaakov, let the law pierce the mountain? The mountain's a way just to demolish the mountain. That was Moshe. Now, who was Moshe? Moshe was the man of truth. What's truth? If a person compromises the truth as much as infinitesimal amount, let's say it's 99.9999 endlessly true, what is it? It's not true. We know in the Hebrew language, the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph represents the most minuscule number. Truth in Hebrew is emes. Emes is truth. If you take away the Aleph, which is something infinitesimal from emes, what's left? Mem tov. That's mes. Means death, worthlessness. The Talmud tells us that the signet of God is truth. Emes, that's the God signet. Torah, the Torah itself is true. Moshe Rabbeinu being the conduit to bring the truth, the divine truth, truth in its absolute sense to this existence, Moshe Rabbeinu had to assume that posture, that profile of truth, unadulterated truth, never ever to compromise. And that's why he was only qualified to be the one to be the pass-through for the Torah to be given to the Jewish people. That's the reason why he's Ish Elokim. He's the man of justice. That's the attribute of justice. For that reason, it says, this is the blessing which Moshe, the Ish Elokim, gave to the Jewish people. You know, very often, when a person over-blesses a person, it's also not good. You're supposed to get what you're supposed to get. Moshe Rabbeinu knew exactly what's needed for the survival and the success of the Jewish people, every one of the tribes, to address their spiritual potential. You have 12 tribes. Each tribe has another objective. In conjunction, we're called the Jewish people, but each tribe complements the other. One wants to study, Torah study. One is to be the attendant in the Mishkan and ultimately in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, who has that grasp of understanding to the smallest detail to receive what you needed, that blessing should be sufficient to guarantee that potential will be actualized? Nobody had that eye, that exacting, precise, detailed ability to comprehend and grasp what exactly is needed. So who's giving the blessing here? The blessing which will guarantee and maintain us till the end of existence. It's Moshe Ish Elokim. He's the man of justice. Justice is what? Is precise exactness. The blessing gave is exact. It's exactly what we needed. It was not in any way deficient or short of what it was meant to be. So therefore we got the full magnitude of what we need to become that function as that eternal people for that reason. That's why he's referred to as Ish Elokim in the context of giving the blessing on the last day of his life. The Or Chaim HaKodesh explains something interesting. Now, why is Moshe Rabbeinu passing away now and not going to Israel? So in last week's reading, we had read because he was told to speak to the rock, and he struck the rock. He said, you had the ability, Hashem says, you had the ability to sanctify my name, and you chose not to. Therefore, you will die now and not go into the land. Ascend the mountain. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, you would think, so who was the cause of his premature death? The Jewish people. Of course, they spoke disrespectfully to him. They so-called ganged up on him. They said, where's the water? We're going to die. He's leading him 40 years. This is the 40th year. The generation of the desert passed away. He took him out of Egypt. He performed the miracles. He's maintaining them. He went to heaven to receive the Torah. He brought a second set of tablets for them. Everything, he's provided everything for them. And after everything's said and done, this is the way you speak? Complaining, not being appreciative. Oh, we're going to die. So he said, listen, you rebellious people. and he lost it, and he struck the rock in anger. God says, but I told you to speak to the rock, not to strike the rock. And because he didn't speak, Hashem says, you had the ability to sanctify my name, you will not go into Canaan. You're not crossing that Jordan. So you would think Moshe Rabbeinu's dream or hope was to go into Eretz Yisrael. As it says, he prayed endless prayers, supplications to go. God says, I don't want to hear about it. You're not going. You're not going. So if a person feels he's being shortchanged or denied because of the Jewish people's misbehavior, could you really give a blessing with a full heart? It's a tough one. It's not so easy. The Torah is saying, despite that, this is the ultimate blessing. Zos HaBrocha, this is the ultimate blessing, even though it's the day of his death and he's dying now only because of them. The bracha was in its fullest with the greatest sense of dedication to them. That's what the Torah is attesting to the fact. Despite that. Now, how do you achieve that? How do you achieve that? Could you imagine? A person, God forbid, lost something very dear to him because of someone, then the person wants a blessing. And you want a blessing, but it's just not possible to give it with your full heart. So how was Moshe Rabbeinu able to give it with his full heart to the Jewish people? Now, I'd mentioned, we find by the Mishkan, the Jews were given a mitzvah to build the Mishkan. And they needed 13 materials to build the Mishkan. For the tapestries, for the tent, for the vessels, carpentry, every precious stones. You needed 13 materials to bring it all together. Okay? Moshe Rabbeinu did not participate in the building of the Mishkan. Because after he gave the order, within a day, everything was there already. Hashem comes to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, Moshe Rabbeinu, why are you down? You're a little low-spirited. Why? He says, because I did not participate in building the Mishkan. So he says, why didn't you participate? He says, because I wanted every Jew should have opportunity to participate. And if I would participate, I may deny another Jew an opportunity. So I said, first, let them engage in the building, and whatever they don't complete, I'll complete. What turned out to be, they did everything. They left nothing over for me. Therefore, I'm low-spirited. I'm disappointed I wasn't able to participate in building in the Mishkan. Hashem says to me, your participation will be greater than theirs. They may have built the Mishkan, but unless you erect it, it has no value. Humanly, it was impossible to lift those beams because of the weight of the beams. You needed a miracle. Hashem says, I will only perform that miracle for you. You'll be able to raise those beams. They can't. So your participation is greater than theirs. So it seems to be this perspective. Let them do what they have to do. I will not do because I'm concerned I may deny them. How does Hashem react? But Moshe, you're the greatest. He extols Moshe for the selfless dedication to the Jewish people, that he shouldn't in any way deny another Jew the opportunity to participate in building the Mishkan. Okay? It's known that the princes of Israel, they had donated the precious stones for the breastplate, which was worn by the Kohen Gadol, by the high priest. And when the Torah writes the word Nesiim, which means princes, the Yud of Nesiim is deleted to indicate that their participation was faulty. It was deficient. Why? Why was it deficient? Because what they had said was, let the Jews do what they have to do, and when they fall short, we'll pick up the slack. We'll complete what they don't do. So God says to them, how do you take a chance? And they were nearly left out. The only thing that was not done were the precious stones. They brought the precious stones. So the Yud in the word Nesim is deleted to indicate that the participation is faulty. It's deficient. And it says, due to the laziness, that's the reason why they waited till the end. Now, You have two conversations, verbatim. Moshe says the exact same words. We will not deny the Jews to participate. Whatever they don't complete, we will complete. Moshe says it, he's extolled for it. They say it, they're reprimanded. And what's the indicator reprimanded? Because the Yud is deleted from the name. You failed. The Rechaim HaKadosh points out over there when we list in order, the 13 materials, it's gold, silver, copper, then all the other materials. The last to be mentioned are these precious stones. You would stay, if we're going according to the value, material value of the material, it should have started Avni Shoim, Avni Menuim, the colored precious stones, gold, silver, copper, and then the others. He leaves it for the end. The Torah leaves it for the end. Why? The answer is because when it comes to giving for God, it's not the material value. It's the intent that it's infused with. Since it was a deficient contribution, because they waited till the end, God says, something, it has the least value of everything that was given. That's why it's left for the end. But why? God has a double standard. Moshe is one standard, and the prince is another standard. How do we understand it? So the way we explained it was, Moshe Rabbeinu, when we speak about the order of the most humble people who ever lived, Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble. Why was he the most humble? Because he says, what are we? We are nothing. Nothing is nothing. Avram says, I am dust and ash. Although dust and ash is not worth very much, and it has no life, but it's something. David HaMelech, King David says, Ani Tolev Eloish. I'm a worm, I'm not a person. A worm is a living creature. It's more than dust and ash. So the order is Moshe the greatest, Avram second, David the third. So Moshe Rabbeinu is nothing. So why, when he said, let them do what they're doing, and what they lack, where they fall short, I will. What is that attributed to? That's attributed to everything Moshe did was for God's glory. If I deny, that means they're displaying God's glory to a lesser degree. Because I have no self-interest. My interest is only God's interest, because there's no self. The princes, they do have a self. It may be minuscule, but they do. So why did you delay? So the Midrash says, because of the laid backness. Because of their atzlus, the laid backness, that's why you delayed. Because if a person really sees something as a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and you have a sense of ego to any degree, there's no way you can hold back. So how did they hold back? Evidently, it's because they don't fully appreciate it's their laziness. It's because they value themselves. They want to be the ones to make the difference. Because if you would understand its value, there's no making a difference. How do you pass on this opportunity? You should have been there immediately. Moshe being, every aspect of his being was dedicated to God's glory. His saying that was only for God's glory. Them, they're not totally God's glory. So why did you delay? The answer is for your self-glory, for yourselves. That's the difference. When Moshe Rabbeinu was told by God, you're not going in, let's say he would have, because of that, and his demise is attributed to the Jews who caused them to become upset. Now, what's God's glory in this world? The Jewish people. The greater the blessing to them, the greater beneficiaries they are of that blessing, their capacity is much greater. That means they're going to bring about God's glory to a greater extent. So if you love God at a level that nobody in the history of existence ever loved God to that degree, because there's no self. So it's impossible that you shortchange them on the bracha, because it's not a personal issue here. With Moshe, there's nothing personal. It's only God. So if only God means, and the Jews being the most advanced, that they should have the greatest capacity, of course, I want to give them the greatest blessing. That's the reason why, even though it was on the day of his death and his dying only because of them, the bracha itself did not fall short of the full degree of bracha that they needed, which he provided for that reason. we find in last week's portion, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I would like to see the land. I want to cross over to see the land. Because visually, could you see the land? I mean, there's areas you could see. You don't see every inch of Eretz Yisrael. We speak in Pirkei Avos, ayin tova, a good eye. There was nobody who had a good eye for the Jewish people like Moshe. What he wanted for them, we can't even relate to what he wanted for them in terms of their success. Again, because it was all directly connected to God's glory. So Moshe wanted to see every aspect of Eretz Yisrael, because when his good eye comes upon that, it will maximize in blessing for them. God says, ascend the mountain and you will see the land. That means visually, miraculously, he saw every inch of Eretz Yisrael. What's behind the mountain, what's in the valley, what's in the cranny, doesn't make a difference. In the cave, Hashem allowed him to see every aspect, every inch of that land. God showed him the day before he passed away, the leaders and the wise men and the Torah sages of every generation. And he blessed everybody. So if God revealed to him everything on the day he died, he passed away, what was the blessing which he gave them on the day that he passed away? The blessing to address all that he had seen, to make sure that every aspect of the land should maximize on its value, its potential. Every person who's going to be the leader or the Torah sage, he should be in a position to maximize on his function, on his position in the equation. So this is the Baal HaTurim. So the bracha, this is the blessing predicated on what God had showed him before. Because now I understand what it's all about. Now I know what kind of blessing to give for that reason. It's like a person is a tool maker, and the person says to the tool maker, I want to be able to do such and such. Could you create a die to manufacture this kind of tool? And he explains him exactly to what degree he wants to, let's say, a diamond cutting machine or whatever other the apparatus may be. So if the person really is creative and gets it and grasps it, he will deliver. He will develop something exactly to bring about that objective, to be able to bring about that result. Moshe Rabbeinu, understanding what the objective is, now I will give a blessing to guarantee that objective can be addressed. That's the Zos HaBrocha. It says, the Zos HaBrocha. This is the ultimate blessing. So what do we need above? And this is the ultimate blessing. What's the and? It says, Zos HaBrocha, this is the ultimate blessing. What's and this is the blessing? Now we find that Moshe Rabbeinu's blessing wasn't the only blessing. God gave a blessing to the Jewish people. The patriarchs gave blessings to the Jewish people, to their progeny, to somebody who's in any way egotistic to a degree. My blessing is the blessing. To negate all previous blessings. Moshe Rabbeinu, no such thing. My blessing is an addition. That's the vuf. And this is the blessing. As great as the blessing is, even if all other blessings may pale in the presence of Moshe's blessing, it's and. It's and this is the greatest blessing. There's always the and. It's only with that humility that only adds to what previously had preceded this moment. That's the and. Once it said something very interesting, that we know that the midwives in Egypt were Yocheved and Miriam, Moshe's mother and his sister. I mean, they had millions of children being born there. There was a time 6 children were born in each litter, and they oversaw them. It means that with the midwives, they oversaw thousands of midwives who delivered children. Miriam, Yocheved, Moshe's mother, and Miriam, his sister. Now, the Torah refers to Moshe's mother as Shifra. That's how she's referred to. There were two Jewish midwives. One's midwife's name was Shifra, and the other midwife's name was Pua. Shifra is Yocheved, and Pua is Miriam. Why was Shifra called Shifra? Why was Yocheved called Shifra? In Hebrew, l'shaper means to beautify. When a child is born, it's full of all kinds of mucus and blood and fluids. It has to be cleansed, cleaned, and beautified. That was her responsibility as a midwife, that when the child is born, to direct them exactly how to cleanse and beautify the child. So when the child is given to its mother, the child is a beautiful child. And what was Miriam's responsibility? She was Pua. Child that comes out of the womb of its mother, is born into existence, it cries, it's irritable, it has to be calmed. Her responsibility was to teach the midwives how to calm the children. So she was called Pua. It's like when you want to calm a person, you say, poo, 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 poo. You know, you make that kind of sound and that calms the child. So I asked the question, and we're speaking about these two great women, Miriam, Yocheved and Miriam, Moshe's mother and sister. And we identify them. It said Paro had given an order, they should kill the male children that are born to the Jewish women. So the Torah tells us, they did not heed the warning of the king of Egypt, did not heed his warning. And they not only did they not kill the children, they actually sustained the children. Why? Because they feared God. They feared God. So here's the question. Is it real important for us to know what area of responsibility he had? One was to beautify the child, the other was to calm the child. I should say, two Jewish midwives, Yocheved and Miriam, they were given the order by the king of Egypt, who was the height of power, and they defied his warning because they feared God. That's what Torah should tell us. Why is it important to know what exactly their vocation was, the particular area of vocation they were as midwives? What is the Torah telling us? The Torah is telling us something phenomenal. A woman who dedicates her life to cleanse the child, beautify the child, and this is day and night, overseeing thousands and thousands of midwives. It has to be in your gut and your blood to be able to deal with this 24/7, continuously. And the one who calms the child, you have to have such a love for children, although it's not your own child, and only therefore you can be so dedicated to this area of vocation. Now, what happens if a king would say to a mother who has an only child, she loves that child more than she loves her own life, I want you to kill your child. That mother, because of her love for that child, cannot kill that child. And the mother would say, you have to kill me first. I cannot kill my child. Women of this level of dedication, Shifra and Pua, they said, kill the children. What should the Torah tells us? It says they defied his warning, his order. Why did they defy it? Because it says they feared God. Not because their lives were dedicated to delivery of children. This, although naturally would say, it's so intermingled in your emotion and in your gut, in your essence. You can't do it. It's more than my own child. Torah attests, no. Even though they were that's not what the reason why they defied it. Because they feared God. Could you imagine that? The fear of God was so overwhelming, being children, Jewish children had nothing to do with it. This is the future of the Jewish people. Because God said, under no circumstance, Paro means nothing. Because they lived, it was embedded in their emotion and minds, God's presence. And that's why they merited. The Rechaim HaKodesh points out, it's unheard of. A couple, Amron and Yocheved, they have 3 children, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. It's unbelievable. One couple should have 3 such exceptional children who are one of a kind in the history of the Jewish people. You know why? Because if not for them, there'd be no Jewish people. Because they defied the warning and the order of the king. That's why there's a Jewish people. They did not kill the males. They defied him. as you defied him, because you feared God, you could have children who are the equivalent of the Jewish people. That's why Moshe, in his dimension of spirituality, was the equivalent of the Jewish people. And Aaron was the equivalent of Moshe. And Miriam was the third leader of the Jewish people, who led the women in song after the splitting of the sea. Because of the level of fear, and because that fear, what they brought about. So to be able to surpass the love for children, that's not the reason. It's fear of God. That tells us who they are. Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm only dying because you denied me the opportunity, because I lost it. And I spoke to the rock, I struck the rock rather than speak to the rock. You're at fault. I have a score to settle. So what am I going to do? If the Jewish people are compromised on the blessing, that means God's glory is to a lesser degree. It's not even a consideration. Not a consideration. There's a story with the Arizal. Arizal had a number of very close inner circle of students. And the Arizal, one of his special students, somebody went and openly insulted him. Really unforgivable. And it was before Yom Kippur, and the Arizal goes and says to his student, even though the person doesn't deserve forgiveness, but you should go forgive him. Why? Because if he's not forgiven and he's held accountable, it's due to you not releasing him from the claim against him. So my advice to you is forgive him. So the student answered the Arizal, when the man originally offended me and insulted me, and whatever he did, I never had a grudge against him, so he doesn't even need forgiveness. You understand? He doesn't even need forgiveness. That means this student was at a level that if he ever puts that up person in a position that there's a claim, so how does God see that person? The person deserves punishment. Because his love for God was at that special level. I never had a claim against him. It's like a parent. Even if a child acts disrespectfully to a parent, it's as water off a duck's back. The parent's love for the child is to such a degree, it's okay. He's my child. It's expected. That's the way it is. This person's love for God was such a level. I never want to put a Jew in a position that his position should be compromised due to his misbehavior. Therefore, I never had a claim against him. Never, for that reason. The head of an organization in Israel, it's called Ezem Mitzion, shared this with me. Rav Shach, as I mentioned, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, blessed memory, he lived till the age of 107. And the head of the organization of Ezem Mitzion, his name is Hananya Cholak. It has a $100 million budget. They provide medical services. They have 24 centers throughout Israel. And he and his wife, Allah Shalom, built this organization. He has very special people who work with him. It's all volunteer. No call, ambulances, medical equipment, Meals on Wheels, therapies, postpartum, everything under the sun. So this Hananya Cholak had studied in Ponevezh. So when Rav Shach was about 102 years old, he would go with him, go to his home every day and help put on his tefillin and daven with him. Because he already had macular degeneration, he couldn't see. So he would pray with him. But he was still functional, his mind worked. And one day he shows up there and Rav Shach breaks down crying. So he says to Rav Shach, what are you crying about? He says he remembers that 85 years ago, there was once a question and he thinks he ruled then too leniently and he did the wrong thing. He's worried what happened 85 years ago. He's rethinking his life. So Hananya tells him, he says to Rav Shach, definitely not. You were justified, you're ruling. He's leading towards age of degeneration. You don't have anything to worry about. But these people, what do they worry about? They worry about somebody that didn't give him sufficient honor. Right? He didn't call you up and say, have a Zisa Pesach or have a Zisa, whatever it is. Right? That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about what exactly. Rav Shach was so special, was known that sukkahs, the seminary girls would come decorate his sukkah to help him. And any girl who participated in decoration of sukkah that year, guaranteed she became a kala. She got engaged to get married. So all the girls, they're waiting for the moment they could come decorate Rav Shach's sukkah. Guaranteed they're meeting the husband that year. It's better than the best shadchan in the world. Without a shadchan fee. And he thanked him profusely and gave him blessings after they came and decorated his sukkah. I'm just telling you how special this person was. There's a certain work says that we can't even fathom the Kuzari. The Kuzari says we can't even fathom, and Amoritz is an ignoramus. That's what Amoritz means, ignoramus. The ignoramus who saw a prophet, we can't even fathom who that person was. You understand? But he's an ignoramus. As they say, very often say, what he forgot, you'll never know for the rest of your life. If you studied and lived 1,000 years. The ignoramus who saw the prophet, what you're able to call just being in his presence, that dimension of holiness was something we can't even relate to. There was a person, his grandfather, had once prayed Ma'ariv with the Vilna Gaon. Because the Vilna Gaon, I said he was only, for 40 years, he did not leave his courtyard in Vilna. And he was really limited to only his inner circle of students. And the ones who prayed with him were only his students. Once in a while, somebody was able to have the privilege to pray with the Vilna Gaon. And he would ask permission, and he would say yes or no. And this person's grandfather prayed with the Vilna Gaon. And his grandfather was an okay Talmud Chacham. His fear of God was not lacking, but he sat and he heard the Vilna Gaon say Kriya Shema. Just the way the words of Shema came out of his mouth. After that Shema that he was exposed to, he was a different person. Being exposed to that level of holiness, he was touched. The rest of his life, he was at a different level. You know what it means to see a prophet? Even though, relatively speaking, you're considered low man on the totem pole. But factually, being exposed to that, you're at a plateau and a plane which is not to be understood. Do you know what it means to see Moshe Rabbeinu, to receive a blessing from Moshe Rabbeinu? The holiest man who ever lived. He radiated holiness. He's giving a blessing. The day that he's passing away, when his soul already has extricated itself, already slightly moved out of the physicality. This is the ultimate blessing. And he understands every detail, and his love and dedication is for you more than your dedication for yourself. What is the impact of that? What is the effect of that? You're different people. Different people. And it continues. Because Yeshua, Joshua, who's chosen to be a successor, he also radiated. God says, take your spirit and pass it on to Yeshua. And he gave him a full dose of it. And as long as Yeshua was alive, the Jews didn't sin with idolatry. Because it says he was a reflection. He reflected, he was a semblance of his teacher. He wasn't quite his teacher. His teacher was the equivalent of the sun. He was the equivalent of the moon. The moon is only a reflection of the sun. But his presence, what he represented, was what his father was, what his teacher was. Like we say in the vernacular, not coming to minimize, chas v'sholem. You know, a son, he's a chip off the old block. It's a chip, only a chip. The old block is the block, he's a chip off the old block. Relatively speaking, Moshe is the sun. He generates that light, that radiance. Yeshua reflects that radiance, but they're not comparable. But still, it's a semblance, and it kept us at a certain level. we said on the liturgy on Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, we said one of the things we repeat after the Chazon, the words of David HaMelech, that he says in Tehillim, in Psalms, Al tovo b'mishpat imoni, kol yitztak lefonecha kol choi. Don't enter into judgment with me, because there's no way I can be vindicated. Impossible. Therefore, I don't want to enter into your judgment. Ki lo yitztak lefonecha kol choi. So he cites a Gemara. The Gemara tells us that even the Avos HaKadoshim, the holy patriarchs, to be able to withstand the unadulterated exactness of judgment of God, nobody has that capacity. Moshe was the only one. Moshe is Ish Elokim. He's the man of Elokim. He's the man that even the attribute of justice, he had the capacity to deal with. That was his dimension of greatness. Why? Why was Moshe the closest to God? He could cleave to God like nobody cleaved to God. Because again, there was no barrier. There was nothing. There was nothing separate to him and God. You know, we had mentioned many times that the basis to come upon the truth of Torah is based on your level of humility. And that's why Torah is compared to water. Just as water flows to from an elevated location to a low location, identically, Torah can only be acquired by a person who has a humble spirit, humility. To be able to come on the truth of Torah, you have to be humble, because you need divine assistance to come upon its truth. Now, divine assistance means you have greater relevance to God. Now, who has the greatest relevance to God, or greater relevance to God? If there's less of you, there's more of him. A person who's pompous, self-centered, God said, the world is not big enough for both of us. You ever meet a person, self-centered person? You meet him, you haven't seen him in 3 months. He says, I haven't seen, where have you been? Within 3 seconds, the conversation is only about the one who asked the question. You're only a means to talk about him. That's a self-centered person. A person who's truly humble, he wants to hear about you, not about himself. The one who's humble, he sees God. He's only there to see God. The self-centered person is, God is only there to serve him. Thank God. Oh, let's hear the punchline. Everything's thank God, because God is serving you what you want. The 9-course meal and the home and the car and everything else that comes along with it. Of course, who could afford such a vacation? And who could be treated so exceptionally? So, because I am who I am. Otherwise, they wouldn't treat me the way they treated me. Okay? Someday, this guy's going to have a rude awakening when he gets kicked out and he falls on his head. They say, what happened? Oh, you finally woke up. It's not you. It's God who put you on that pedestal. The Maharal of Prague explains that in the olden days, people, when they would travel, they would put wine in a skin. It was a leather pouch. Now, the skin, what was the thickness of that leather? Very, as thin as it could be. Why? Because the thinner the leather was, the greater capacity is to put that water in there, or the wine in there. If it was thicker, so there's less of a capacity. So the Maharal Prague said the same thing. If there's less of you, there's more room to put that Torah in there. If there's more of you, there's not much room to put that Torah in there. And that's what humility is all about. We see things if we see less of ourselves. Moshe Rabbeinu saw everything with precision, exactness, because there was no Moshe. All there was God. And because there was God, therefore, when he saw the needs of the Jewish people and their value, and the value is because we are God's people, and God's glory only comes to us, therefore the blessing he gave us was the ultimate blessing, understanding exactly what our needs were to be that glorious people to glorify God. Okay, we'll stop here. I think tomorrow I'm going to speak directly about Sukkot from 1 to 2.
Oh, you did.
Thank you very much.
Rather than Ramchal. Okay, everybody be well.
Good to see you again, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Rabbi.
a little late.